Hi everyone, it's Sam, the Stoic teacher here. If this is your first time here, I am a philosophy and theology graduate from the University of Cambridge with a passion for Stoic philosophy. I now have the absolute pleasure of teaching philosophy and religious studies in South London. Keep watching to see why a trip to IKEA reminded me of the wisdom of an ancient philosopher from 2,000 years ago.
This is an aristocracy. I'm Socrates, but my skin more chocolatey. What's up, woo?
All the quotes that we discuss can be found on my Instagram page at The Stoic Teacher. The first quote for this week is on friendship, and it is from Seneca. Now, this quote came to my mind when reflecting upon the common misconceptions about the philosophy of Stoicism. Now, often Stoicism is viewed as something that it isn't. The dictionary definition of stoic or stoical, word for word, says enduring pain without showing one's feelings. This sounds like something that's very unhealthy. It sounds like someone that represses their emotions and doesn't show their feelings to their loved ones. However, if you look at this quote from Seneca, which you can find in letter 3 of his Letters from a Stoic, you can see that the image is rather different. Seneca says, "Think for a long time whether or not you should admit a given person to your friendship. But when you have decided to do so, welcome him heart and soul, and speak as unreservedly with him as you would with yourself." Now, clearly, Seneca is not saying to hide our feelings. Indeed, he's saying that once you've chosen a close friend, you should in fact speak with them just as you would yourselves. That is clearly someone that is open, that is vulnerable. Cato, a Stoic hero who fought against Julius Caesar, is said to have cried and screamed and wailed openly when he heard of any of his men in battle dying. And clearly, again, someone that's willing to be open and vulnerable. Right, the second quote for this week is on gratitude and encourages us to think positively about what we already have rather than constantly chasing after more things. Marcus Aurelius in Book 7 of the Meditations says, "Don't imagine having things that you don't have. Rather, pick the best of what you do have and think how much you would want them if you didn't have them." This clearly encourages us to be grateful for what we already have. This touches upon the fact that if we are on a hedonic treadmill, which is something Massimo Pilucci talks about, this idea of constantly running towards the next pleasurable or good thing, then we will never be satisfied. If we say to ourselves, once I have X, I am happy, you'll get X, and then there's Y. There's something else that you can chase after. For example, if I want a Lamborghini, I work my way up, I buy a supercar, I will then perhaps want a yacht or a bigger mansion. There's always more. J. Cole spreads a similar message in his song Love Yours, where he says there's no such thing as a life that's better than yours, and spreads the message to be grateful for what we already have. In our Circle of Control initiative for secondary schools, we aim to use Stoic principles to encourage students who have had issues with their peers to focus on the positives within a situation and to move forward focusing on what's within their control. Because of course there's always an ideal scenario in a situation. It would be great if person A could be best friends with person B, but that's not always the case, and that's what we sometimes see. And the initiative through peer mediation is aimed at supporting students to reframe and to be able to think about things through the prism of what is within their control and what they have to be grateful for. For more information on our initiatives for secondary schools, please do feel free to get in touch. Right, on to the third quote. This third quote is on acceptance and is from Epictetus, writing in the Enchiridion 8. Epictetus says, "Don't hope that events will turn out the way you want. Welcome events in whichever way they happen. This is the path to peace." Epictetus here is arguing that if we constantly desire things outside of our control, if we constantly want things to turn out exactly how we imagine them, we will inevitably be unhappy all the time. And Nietzsche popularized the phrase amor fati, which means the lover of fate. He said that the person who is able to love fate whichever way it goes masters themselves. This can apply both to small things such as kind of road rage, or I don't know, walking around IKEA with people walking really, really, really slowly in front of you with no awareness of who's around them, or it could apply to really, really big things. On small things, I had a mini rant while I was in IKEA. So it was way too busy in IKEA for you to be able to hear me, but essentially I was getting frustrated as I was walking around. At one point a small child ran headfirst into my butt, and I thought to myself, why am I letting this disturb my tranquility? As the third quote says, we have to learn to accept these small things or we're just going to be unhappy. Elsewhere, Epictetus says we should treat crowds as a festival. Big events like the Olympics, you wouldn't go there and be surprised someone bumps into you by accident. The same's true of IKEA on a Sunday. Don't go there expecting people running around. It's a furniture shop, not an athletics track. Now, we've seen how this quote can help us in relation to the small things. In relation to the big things, when I was training to teach, I went to the Teach First Impact Conference, and there was a session called Dancing in the Rain, provided by a man called Dick Moore. He was a former headmaster and unfortunately lost his son, who passed away tragically. Mr. Moore encouraged us as trainee teachers to prioritize students' mental health above all else. He said that we needed to encourage students to live by the following quote: "Life is not about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning to dance in the rain." This quote stuck with me and is one that I still place as the first slide on every assembly that I do every single week. Dick Moore had gone through, the worst possible thing, losing a child. And he wanted to encourage us. And for me, the sentiment of that quote is very similar to what Epictetus was saying. There is always going to be rain. Bad things will always happen. We need to think about how it is that we perceive those events. And on this, Mo Gaudat, a Google executive, and sadly another man to have lost his child, his son, wrote a book called Solve for Happy, where he came up with a happiness equation. This equation was your perception of events minus your expectations of how life should behave equals happiness, or the extent to which you're happy. So essentially he was saying that if your expectations of life are that everything you want should always happen 100% of the time, and your perception of events is that this is never happening, you are necessarily always going to be unhappy. And reflecting on this equation got me thinking kind of social media, and the studies which suggest that it's having a very poor impact on many young people and indeed people across society. And I think this may partially be because social media massively heightens our expectations of how life should behave. You go onto Instagram and what you're seeing is, the high life and wealth and people just posting themselves when they're at their utter high points. And what this can also lead to when people are just seeing the positives of others' lives without any of the negatives is that their perception of events becomes that their life is somehow worse. And therefore, naturally, we end up in a vicious cycle of unhappiness. And so this quote has a lot to say on both how we conduct ourselves in terms of small things, viewing life as a festival, as we spoke about in IKEA, and also the big things, and helping others and learning ourselves to dance in the rain. Thank you very much for joining me, and I'll see you again next week at The Stoic Teacher, where we use ancient wisdom for modern times. See you next week.